The ambush came exactly as Marcus had predicted. 3 groups of Void Swarm vessels emerged from the asteroid field like dark flowers blooming in space, their sleek ships moving with predatory grace toward what appeared to be 3 separate, vulnerable convoy groups. Through her mental connection with the human navigation systems, Zarathis felt their confidence, their certainty, that this would be another easy victory against disorganized galactic forces. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "All ships maintain formation," Marcus spoke into his communication device, his voice calm despite the energy crackling between his consciousness and Zarathis's. "Wait for my signal." The princess felt the battle through 37 different perspectives at once. Human pilots gripping their controls with white knuckles, Centaurian gunners calculating firing solutions with mathematical precision, Nebula Collective navigators flowing through their gaseous command interfaces like living clouds. Each species brought their own strengths to the coordinated defense, but it was the human element that bound them all together. Human unpredictability, human stubbornness, human refusal to accept defeat, even when the odds looked impossible. The first Void Swarm attack wave struck the leftmost convoy group with devastating force. Plasma bolts designed to cripple engines and disable weapon systems flashed through space in carefully coordinated patterns. Under normal circumstances, the attack would have succeeded completely. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Now," Marcus whispered. And Zarathis felt the word echo through the mental network connecting all their forces. The apparently crippled ship suddenly came alive with coordinated movement. What had looked like 3 separate groups revealed itself to be a single organism with multiple parts, each one aware of what the others were doing. The Void Swarm had planned for conventional tactics, but they had never encountered anything like human-style coordination enhanced by Dominion energy manipulation. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic military history. Ships that appeared to be fleeing suddenly reversed course and attacked from unexpected angles. Damaged vessels that should have been helpless continued fighting with improvised weapon systems and creative use of their remaining resources. Most confusing of all for the Void Swarm, the galactic forces seemed to anticipate every attack before it happened, responding to threats that hadn't even been fired yet. Through the mental link, Zarathis experienced the battle from a human perspective and finally understood what made their species so dangerous to their enemies. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to survive, and those were 2 completely different things. When a Centaurian cruiser took critical damage to its main engines, the human pilot of a nearby escort ship immediately moved to provide cover, using his smaller vessel as a shield while the larger ship completed emergency repairs. It was tactically unsound, strategically risky, and completely illogical by conventional military standards. It was also exactly what the situation required. When a group of Void Swarm fighters tried to overwhelm a Nebula Collective transport, 3 different species coordinated an instantaneous response that left the attackers scattered and confused. The humans provided unpredictable maneuvering patterns. The Dominion energy manipulators created temporary defensive barriers, and the Hive Collective calculated firing solutions that turned the hunters into the hunted. But the most remarkable moment came when the Void Swarm commander apparently realized that this wasn't going according to plan and tried to withdraw his forces. Marcus, speaking through the mental network to all ships simultaneously, said something that Zarathis would remember for the rest of her very long life. "Nobody leaves. We finish this here." It wasn't a tactical command. It wasn't based on strategic considerations or calculated risk assessments. It was pure human stubbornness. The absolute refusal to let an enemy escape to attack again later. And somehow, that stubborn determination spread through the entire fleet like a contagious disease. Centaurian ships that had been preparing to let the enemy withdraw suddenly accelerated to pursue them. Nebula Collective vessels that had been focusing on defensive positions shifted to offensive formations. Even the typically cautious Hive Collective began executing attack patterns that prioritized enemy destruction over their own safety. The battle ended not with the Void Swarm retreating to fight another day, but with their complete defeat. When the last enemy ship exploded in a brief flare of light against the asteroid field, the mental network fell silent for several long seconds. Then, Gradually, Zarathis began to hear something she had never experienced before. Celebration, not the formal, restrained acknowledgement of victory that characterized Dominion military culture, but raw, emotional, joyful celebration. Humans cheering and laughing, other species expressing satisfaction and relief in their own ways, all of them connected through the mental link she had established. For the first time in her life, Princess Zarathis felt like she belonged to something larger than herself. The aftermath of the battle brought changes that no one had expected. Captain Vexistar, who had been skeptical of human tactical methods, formally requested that human officers be integrated into Centaurian fleet command structures. Commander Zythara proposed joint training exercises between the Nebula Collective and human forces to develop new coordination techniques. Even the Hive Collective, traditionally the most isolated of the galactic species, expressed interest in studying human psychological warfare methods. But the most significant change involved Zarathis herself. 3 days after the battle, she stood in what had once been Marcus's tiny quarters, but had now been expanded into an official cultural exchange center. The space still smelled of coffee and old books, but it now also contained communication equipment, connecting them to dozens of other ships and stations throughout the galaxy. "The Dominion Council has formally approved your request," Captain Mordeth reported, though his tone suggested he still couldn't quite believe what he was saying. "You have been appointed as the first official human liaison in Dominion history." Zarathis looked up from the report she had been writing, a detailed analysis of human tactical psychology for distribution to all allied military commands. "And the reaction from the royal family? Your father, the Emperor, is confused but supportive. Your mother wants to meet this human pilot who convinced their daughter to give up her claim to the throne. Your younger brother has apparently started studying human military history." Marcus looked up from his own work, which involved training materials for mixed-species crew coordination. "Your brother sounds like he has good taste in reading material." The transformation hadn't been easy. Merging human unpredictability with Dominion precision required constant adjustment and frequent compromise. There were cultural misunderstandings, technical difficulties, and political complications that arose almost daily. But there were also discoveries that neither species could have made alone. Human creativity enhanced by Dominion technology produced innovations that surprised everyone. Dominion strategic thinking tempered by human adaptability created military doctrines that were both effective and sustainable. Most importantly, the mental connection they had forged during the battle had taught both species that cooperation could create possibilities that pure competition never could. "Incoming message from Earth Command," Marcus announced, reading from his communication display. "They want to know if we're interested in establishing a permanent cultural exchange program. Apparently, the preliminary reports about our methods have impressed some very important people." "What did you tell them?" Zarathis asked. "I told them we'd think about it," Marcus replied with a grin. "Right after we finish dealing with the 17 other species that want to study our coordination techniques, the 12 governments that want to hire us as military advisors, and the scientific consortium that wants to understand how Dominion energy manipulation interfaces with human neural patterns." Zarathis laughed, a sound that would have shocked anyone who had known her before she walked through that door 4 weeks ago. The formal, restrained princess who had fled from political marriages and diplomatic protocols had been replaced by someone who understood that the most important battles weren't fought for power or territory, but for the right to choose your own purpose. Outside the expanded quarters, the diplomatic mission continued toward its original destination. But now it carried something more valuable than trade agreements and military alliances. It carried proof that different species could work together not just for mutual benefit, but for mutual understanding. The coffee was still terrible, but Zarathis had developed a taste for it. Marcus had started reading Dominion poetry, though he admitted that most of it went over his head. They still argued about proper procedures versus improvised solutions, but their arguments had become collaborative rather than competitive, and when the next crisis came, as they both knew it would, they would face it together. A human who had learned that sometimes the best plans were the ones you made up as you went along, and a former princess who had discovered that real leadership meant lifting others up rather than standing above them. Princess Zarathis tried her best to hide her reaction as the bitter black liquid hit her tongue, but her crystalline skin flickered from violet to green in an involuntary display of disgust. Marcus noticed immediately and started laughing, a warm sound that filled the small quarters in a way that formal court laughter never did. "Yeah, it's pretty awful," he admitted, taking a large gulp from his own cup without any visible reaction. The ship's recycling systems weren't really designed for Earth beverages, but after a few weeks out here you learn to appreciate anything that keeps you awake during the night shift. She took another careful sip, trying to understand why anyone would voluntarily consume something so unpleasant. The taste was harsh and complex, nothing like the perfectly balanced nutrition drinks her people preferred. But there was something about the warmth of it, the way Marcus seemed to genuinely enjoy sharing it with her, that made her want to try again. "How long have you been on this ship?" she asked, looking around the cluttered quarters with new curiosity. Now that the initial shock had worn off, she could see patterns in what had first appeared to be random chaos. The books were sorted by subject matter, with titles covering everything from stellar navigation to something called poetry. The photographs were arranged in clusters that seemed to tell stories about places and people. "About 6 months, Marcus replied, settling back in his chair with his coffee cup balanced on one knee. "This is my third deep space diplomatic mission. Usually they last about a year, depending on how long it takes everyone to agree on trade routes and military cooperation." 3 missions? Zarathis was surprised. Most species only sent their most experienced diplomats and senior military officers on these important voyages. "You must be quite accomplished for such a young human," Marcus snorted, nearly spitting out his coffee. "Young? I'm 32 years old. That's practically middle-aged for someone in my line of work. And I'm not a diplomat, just a pilot. They need someone who can handle the navigation systems when we're jumping between different stellar regions." 32 years old. Zarathis tried to process that information. By Dominion standards, 32 years was barely out of infancy. She had spent longer than that just learning the basic protocols for interacting with other royal families. The idea that someone so young could be trusted with the navigation of a ship carrying the galaxy's most important political figures was absurd. But then she remembered the way he had calmly accepted her dramatic entrance. The casual competence with which he had prepared the coffee, the neat handwriting in his journal that suggested hours of careful practice. Perhaps human development was different than she had assumed. "What were you writing when I arrived?" she asked, gesturing toward the journal still open on his desk. "Just personal notes," Marcus said. But something in his tone suggested there was more to it. "I try to keep track of interesting things that happen during these missions. Cultural observations, technical problems, that sort of thing. May I see?" He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and handed her the journal. The writing was in standard galactic script, but the style was unlike anything she had read before. Instead of formal reports or official documentation, these were personal thoughts and impressions written in casual language. The Centaurian delegates spent 3 hours arguing about the proper way to serve their traditional fermented grain drink. She read aloud from a recent entry. "Apparently, the temperature difference of 2 degrees can completely change the social meaning of the gesture. Note to self, humans are not the only species that make simple things complicated." Marcus looked slightly embarrassed. "It's not exactly official diplomatic correspondence." "It's fascinating," Zarathis said, and meant it. She flipped through more pages, finding observations about dozens of different species, their customs, their technologies, their apparent motivations during negotiations. But what struck her most was the tone of genuine curiosity and respect. Marcus wrote about even the most alien behaviors as if they were puzzles to be understood, rather than oddities to be dismissed. "Here," she said, pointing to another passage. "You wrote about the void swarm attacks on the outer colonies, but this information is classified. How do you know about refugee movements and military casualty reports?" Marcus's expression grew more serious. "Because we're the ones transporting the survivors. Every few weeks, our shipping routes take us past evacuation points. We see the refugee ships, talk to the crews, help with emergency supplies when we can. He paused, looking out the small porthole at the stars beyond. The politicians talk about statistics and strategic resources. We see the actual people trying to escape with whatever they can carry. There was something in his voice that made Zarathus study his face more carefully. Despite his casual manner, there was a weight behind his eyes that spoke of experience with loss and hardship. She realized that her assumptions about human inexperience might be completely wrong. "Your people live such short lives," she said, trying to understand. "Why do you involve yourselves in conflicts that might last longer than your entire lifespans?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee and apparently thinking about how to answer. When he finally spoke, his words were careful and deliberate. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "And because short lives doesn't mean meaningless lives. Maybe we can't see the end of a 100-year war, but we can see the refugee ship that needs supplies today. We can train the next generation of pilots to be better than we were. We can keep fighting so that maybe our children's children will inherit something better than what we started with." He pulled out a small device and showed her images stored on it. Pictures of a blue and green planet with white clouds swirling around it in beautiful patterns. Cities that looked nothing like the sterile perfection of Dominion architecture, with buildings that grew organically around rivers and mountains rather than imposing geometric order on the landscape. "This is Earth," Marcus said. "It's not perfect. We've made a lot of mistakes over the centuries. Polluted the air, poisoned the water, fought wars over resources and ideologies. But it's home. And every human out here in space carries a piece of that world with them." Zarathus found herself leaning closer to look at the images. She had seen Earth in official databases, of course, but those were sterile satellite photographs that showed continents and oceans without any sense of life or personality. These pictures were different. They showed children playing in parks, old people sitting on benches feeding strange flying creatures, markets full of colorful foods and handmade objects. "It looks chaotic," she observed. "Yeah, it is," Marcus agreed, with obvious fondness. "Beautifully, wonderfully chaotic. No grand design, no perfect plan, just billions of people trying to figure out how to live together and make something better for the next generation." Outside in the corridor, she could hear the ongoing commotion as her guard tried to explain the sanctuary situation to increasingly frustrated Dominion officials. Captain Mordeth's voice carried through the walls as he spoke into his communication device, reporting to higher authorities about the unprecedented diplomatic crisis. "They're going to demand your return," Marcus said, apparently following her thoughts. "This can't last forever." "I know," Zarathus admitted. "But for now, for just a little while, I want to understand how you live without protocols and proper procedures. How you make decisions based on what you think is right instead of what tradition demands." Marcus stood up and moved to a shelf, pulling down one of his books. It was old and worn, with a cracked cover and pages that had been turned thousands of times. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "This might help explain some things. It's poetry mostly. Human writers trying to make sense of life and death and everything in between. Fair warning, though, it's not exactly optimistic reading." She accepted the book carefully, surprised by how light it felt in her hands. The cover read, "Collected Poems of Earth, 3rd edition." When she opened it randomly and read the first line her eyes found, she felt something shift in her understanding of human nature. "Do not go gentle into that good night," she read aloud, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar rhythm of the words. "Old age should burn and rave at close of day." "That's about fighting against death," Marcus explained quietly. "About refusing to give up even when everything looks hopeless. It's one of my favorites." Zarathus read the poem again, more slowly this time, trying to understand the emotions behind the words. Her people viewed death as simply another phase of existence, a natural transition to be accepted with dignity and grace. But this human poem spoke of rage against ending, of fighting to preserve something precious, even in the face of inevitable loss. "Your species is very strange," she said finally. "Yeah," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "We get that a lot. But strange doesn't necessarily mean wrong, does it? Outside, the commotion was getting louder. Soon, she knew, there would be formal demands for her return, diplomatic protests, possibly even threats of military action if she didn't end this unprecedented breach of protocol. But for now, sitting in a cluttered human quarters, drinking terrible coffee and reading poetry about defying death, Princess Zarathis found herself wondering if perhaps there were things. The emergency alert that woke them both came at what Marcus called, "Oh, dark 30, a human expression that apparently meant the middle of the sleep cycle. Red lights flashed throughout the ship while warning signals blared in 17 different languages. Princess Zarathis sat up from where she had been resting on Marcus's spare sleep mat, her skin automatically brightening in response to the perceived threat. Void swarm scouts detected in the outer sensor range, the ship's computer announced, in its calm, mechanical voice. All personnel report to emergency stations. Diplomatic protocols are suspended until further notice. Marcus was already moving, pulling on his uniform jacket and grabbing equipment from various locations around his quarters. Despite having been asleep moments before, he moved with quick efficiency that spoke of long practice with emergency situations. "How bad is it?" Zarathis asked, reading the tactical information that her internal systems automatically pulled from the ship's data network. 3 small void swarm vessels, moving fast toward the diplomatic convoy. Not enough to destroy a ship this size, but more than enough to cause serious damage. Probably just a probing attack, Marcus replied, checking his communication device for orders. "They like to test our response times, see how quickly we can organize defenses." He paused at the door, looking back at her with concern. "You should probably return to your official quarters. If this turns into a real fight, the Dominion delegates will want their princess somewhere safe." But Zarathis found herself shaking her head. Over the past 2 days, she had grown comfortable in this cluttered little space that smelled of coffee and old books. The thought of returning to her sterile royal suite, with its perfect temperature control and formal furniture, felt like stepping backwards into a cage. "I'm safer here," she said, and surprised herself by meaning it. "Besides, you might need help with whatever it is human pilots do during emergencies." Marcus grinned at that, a quick flash of humor even in the middle of a crisis. "Human pilots mostly try not to crash into things while getting shot at. It's harder than it sounds." They made their way through corridors filled with rushing crew members, each species moving according to their own emergency protocols. The Centaurians formed orderly lines and moved with military precision. The gaseous beings from the Nebula Collective flowed together in efficient streams. The insectoid hive delegates moved in perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. Humans, Zarathis noticed, did something completely different. They scattered in what appeared to be random directions, shouting information to each other, improvising solutions to problems as they encountered them. It looked like chaos, but somehow everyone seemed to end up where they needed to be. "Your people don't follow standard emergency procedures," she observed as they reached the navigation center. "Standard procedures are written by people who have time to think," Marcus replied, settling into his control station and immediately beginning what appeared to be a complex series of calculations. "Emergencies happen when you don't have time to think. Sometimes you have to make up the procedures as you go along." The main tactical display showed the approaching void swarm vessels as red dots against a field of stars. They moved in unpredictable patterns, changing course randomly to avoid targeting computers. The ship's defensive systems kept trying to lock onto them, but the targeting solutions kept failing as the enemy ships shifted direction. "Conventional wisdom says we should maintain defensive formation and wait for them to commit to an attack vector," announced the ship's tactical officer, a methodical Centaurian named Captain Vextar. "Our weapons have longer range than theirs, so we can destroy them before they get close enough to do damage." But Marcus was shaking his head as he studied the sensor readings. "They're not trying to attack us directly. Look at the flight patterns." He highlighted sections of the enemy movement on his display. "They're mapping our response times, testing how quickly our different systems come online. This is intelligence gathering." "How can you tell?" Zarathis asked, leaning over his shoulder to study the data. She had access to the same information through her own internal systems, but she couldn't see the patterns Marcus was pointing out. Because it's what I would do, Marcus replied simply. If I were commanding 3 small ships against a larger convoy, I wouldn't waste them on a direct attack. I'd use them to gather information for the real assault that's coming later. He started typing rapidly, pulling up navigation charts and tactical projections. His fingers moved across the control interfaces with practiced ease, switching between different types of data displays faster than Zarathus could follow. See this? Marcus highlighted a section of space several light minutes away from their current position. There's an asteroid field here, dense enough to hide larger ships. If I were planning an ambush, that's where I'd stage the main attack. Force. Captain Vextar looked skeptical. Human pilot Chen, your species has limited experience with large-scale space warfare. Perhaps you should leave tactical analysis to those with more expertise. Maybe, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But humans have lots of experience with being outnumbered and outgunned. We've gotten pretty good at figuring out what desperate people do when they're trying to win fights they probably can't win. He pulled up historical records from something called the Human Defense Archives, files that Zarathus had never seen despite her access to most diplomatic databases. The data showed dozens of military engagements from Earth's history, conflicts where human forces had faced superior numbers or technology and found ways to win through unconventional tactics. This is from a battle called Midway, Marcus explained, showing a tactical reconstruction on his display. Human naval forces against a much larger enemy fleet. The humans used decoy signals and false information to trick the enemy into attacking the wrong targets at the wrong time. He switched to another file. This one is from something called the Battle of Britain. Outnumbered fighter pilots using radar technology and coordinated communication to defeat a larger air force. These are all ancient conflicts, Captain Vextar pointed out. Primitive warfare with outdated technology. The technology changes, Marcus replied. The psychology doesn't. When someone is desperate enough to take big risks, they usually have a plan that's either brilliant or completely insane. Sometimes both. Zarathus found herself studying the human battle records with growing fascination. Her people's military education focused on overwhelming force applied through superior technology. The idea of deliberately fighting from a position of weakness, of using disadvantage as an advantage, was completely foreign to Dominion strategic thinking. Why do your people keep fighting battles they can't win? She asked. Marcus looked up from his displays, meeting her eyes with an expression that was both serious and oddly gentle. Because sometimes you can't win, but you can choose how you lose. And sometimes, if you're really lucky and really stubborn, you find out that the thing you thought was impossible was just really, really difficult. The proximity alarm suddenly went quiet. On the main display, the 3 Void Swarm vessels had changed course and were accelerating away from the convoy, apparently retreating without having fired a single shot. They got what they came for, Marcus said quietly. Now they know our defensive response patterns, our weapons ranges, how long it takes us to coordinate between different species command structures. He was already pulling up new navigation charts, plotting courses through the asteroid field he had identified earlier. The real attack will come in about 6 hours, when we're passing through the narrowest part of this corridor. Captain Vexistar was studying the tactical displays with new attention. Human pilot Chen, please explain your reasoning. They need to know 2 things to plan a successful ambush, Marcus replied, highlighting sections of their projected course. First, they need to know how we fight, which they just learned. Second, they need to catch us somewhere we can't maneuver easily. He pointed to a section of space where several large asteroid fields created a natural bottleneck. This is the only place in the next 3 days where a small force could effectively trap a larger one. And you believe they have additional ships hidden in the asteroid field? I'd bet my life on it, Marcus said, then paused and corrected himself. Actually, I guess I'm betting my life on it. We all are. Zarathus watched the exchange with growing understanding. This was why humans were included in galactic military planning, despite their technological limitations and short lifespans. They thought differently than other species, approaching problems from angles that more advanced civilizations would never consider. What do you recommend? She asked. Marcus grinned, the same expression he had worn when offering her coffee 2 days ago. We do something so stupid that it might actually work. But first, I need to ask you a question that might sound crazy. Ask. How much do you trust me? Zarathus looked around the navigation center, at the alien officers studying human tactical records with new respect, at Marcus calmly preparing for a battle that could determine the fate of the entire diplomatic mission. 2 days ago, she had been a princess running from political. Marcus's plan was indeed insane. You want to deliberately fly into the asteroid field, Captain Vextar repeated slowly, as if saying the words might make them make more sense. The same asteroid field where you believe enemy forces are waiting to ambush us. Not just fly into it, Marcus corrected, pulling up detailed navigation charts on the main display. I want to split our convoy into 3 groups and approach from different angles, making ourselves look like easy targets. Then when they spring their trap, we spring ours. The navigation center had filled with senior officers from all the major species represented on the diplomatic mission. Zarathus watched their faces as Marcus explained his strategy, seeing expressions that ranged from confusion to outright horror. The idea of deliberately walking into an ambush violated every principle of conventional military doctrine. The Void Swarm will have positioned their ships at these 3 points, Marcus continued, highlighting locations within the asteroid field. Natural hiding spots where they can remain undetected until we're committed to our course. They're expecting us to fly through in standard formation, which would put us directly in their crossfire. So instead we give them exactly what they want? Asked Commander Zythera of the Nebula Collective, her gaseous form shifting colors to indicate skepticism. This seems counterproductive. We give them what they think they want, Marcus replied. 3 separate groups of ships apparently vulnerable and uncoordinated, but actually will be coordinating in ways they won't expect. He gestured toward Zarathus, who felt suddenly uncomfortable as every alien eye in the room focused on her. Princess Zarathus has the ability to establish energy links between distant objects. If she can connect our navigation systems across all 3 groups, we can appear to be separated while actually functioning as a single unit. The silence that followed was complete. Zarathus could feel the weight of their expectations, along with their doubts about trusting military strategy to a runaway princess and a human pilot who made up tactics as he went along. The energy requirements would be enormous, she said slowly, thinking through the technical challenges. I've never attempted to maintain 3 simultaneous connections across such distances, especially while under enemy fire. But it's possible? Marcus asked. Zarathus considered the question carefully. Her people's energy manipulation abilities were well documented, but mostly used for ceremonial purposes or small-scale technical applications. What Marcus was suggesting would push her powers far beyond anything she had ever attempted. Theoretically possible, she admitted. But if the connections fail at the wrong moment, all 3 groups would be genuinely separated and vulnerable. That's why we need a backup plan, Marcus said, switching to a new display showing weapon trajectories and defensive patterns. If the energy links work, we can coordinate our attack to hit all 3 enemy positions simultaneously. If they don't work, each group fights independently using human-style improvisation tactics. Captain Vexistar studied the tactical projections with obvious reluctance. Human pilot Chen, this plan requires our forces to act in ways that contradict basic strategic principles. You are asking seasoned military commanders to abandon proven methods in favor of untested theories. I'm asking you to trust that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to do something your enemy would never expect, Marcus replied. The Void Swarm has studied conventional galactic military doctrine for decades. They know how we're supposed to respond to their attacks, but they've never fought humans before, and they've definitely never seen Dominion energy manipulation used for real-time tactical coordination. Commander Thekvar of the Hive Collective spoke up, his multiple voices harmonizing in the eerie way his species used for formal communications. The risk is substantial. If this strategy fails, we lose not only our military escort but also the most important diplomatic gathering in recent galactic history. And if we follow standard procedures, we definitely lose, Marcus countered. Because standard procedures are exactly what the Void Swarm is planning for. They didn't send scouts just to see how pretty our ships look. They studied our defenses so they could design an attack that beats them. Zarathis found herself standing up, drawing attention back to herself. For the first time since entering Marcus's quarters 3 days ago, she felt the full weight of her royal authority settling around her like a familiar cloak. "I will attempt the energy coordination," she announced in a voice that carried across the room with unmistakable command presence. "But I have conditions." The alien officers waited for her to continue, suddenly reminded that they were dealing with someone whose political authority extended across 17 star systems. "If we do this, we do it completely," she said. "No half measures, no backup, protocols that undermine the main strategy. Either you trust the plan or you don't." "Your ethereal magnificence," Captain Mordeth spoke up from where he had been standing quietly near the door. Her royal guard had been notably silent during the tactical discussions, but now he stepped forward with obvious concern. "The personal risk to you is enormous. If the energy drain is too great, you could suffer permanent damage to your consciousness." "Everything we do carries risk," Zarathis replied, echoing words she had heard Marcus say earlier. "The question is whether we take calculated risks to achieve something important, or whether we take safe actions that guarantee failure." Marcus was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something deeper too. Trust, perhaps, or recognition of some kind. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "The energy coordination won't work unless we can establish a direct connection between your consciousness and our navigation systems. Not just a technical link, but an actual mental interface." "What does that mean exactly?" Commander Zythera asked. Marcus hesitated, glancing at Zarathis before answering. "It means she'll experience everything our pilots experienced during the battle. Every evasive maneuver, every weapon's impact, every moment of fear or determination. Human consciousness isn't designed for that kind of integration with alien mental patterns. And my consciousness isn't designed for integration with human technology," Zarathis added. "The interface could be intense." The room fell quiet again as everyone processed the implications. What Marcus was proposing wasn't just a risky military strategy. It was an unprecedented merging of human and Dominion capabilities that could have unpredictable consequences for both participants. "How long until we reach the asteroid field?" asked Captain Vextar. 4 hours 37 minutes, Marcus replied without checking his instruments. "Very well. We will attempt your strategy, human pilot Chen. But if this fails, responsibility falls on both of you." As the senior officers dispersed to prepare their ships, Marcus and Zarathis found themselves alone in the navigation center. The tactical displays still showed their projected course through the asteroid field, along with the estimated positions of enemy forces waiting to attack them. "You didn't have to volunteer for this," Marcus said quietly. "I could have found another way to coordinate the attack." "No, you couldn't," Zarathis replied. "And even if you could, I wouldn't want you to. For the first time in my life, I have the chance to do something that actually matters. Something more important than trade negotiations and political marriages." Marcus smiled, the same warm expression she had seen when he offered her coffee on that first day. "You know, for someone who grew up in royal palaces, you're pretty good at this whole making things up as you go along thing." "I had a good teacher," she said. They spent the next hour working out the technical details of the mental interface, running simulations, and calibrating the connection protocols. The process required them to synchronize their thoughts and emotions in ways that were both intimate and completely alien to their respective species. When they finally achieved a stable connection, Zarathis gasped at the sudden flood of human consciousness flowing through her awareness. Marcus's mind was nothing like what she had expected. Instead of the simple primitive thoughts she had been taught to expect from short-lived species, she found a complex landscape of memories, emotions, and ideas that stretched back through years of experience. She saw Earth through his eyes, felt his love for the chaotic blue planet that had shaped his people. She experienced his determination to protect something beautiful and imperfect, his willingness to fight impossible battles because the alternative was giving up everything worth defending. And Marcus, for his part, found himself overwhelmed by the vast scope of Dominion consciousness, centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience flowing through his awareness like a river of light. But beneath all that accumulated wisdom, he sensed something that surprised him completely: loneliness. Despite her incredible power and royal status, Princess Zarathis had spent most of her very long life feeling isolated and misunderstood, surrounded by people who feared her abilities or wanted to use them for their own purposes. "Ready?" he asked, as the first proximity alarms began sounding from the approaching asteroid field. "Ready," she replied, and together they reached out to establish connections with the navigation. Princess Zarathis of the Ethereal Dominion stormed through the endless corridors of the diplomatic vessel Concordia, her crystalline skin pulsing with angry violet light. The massive ship housed representatives from 47 different species, all gathered for what the politicians called crucial alliance negotiations. But what she knew was nothing more than a cosmic marketplace for arranged marriages and trade deals. Her flowing robes, woven from captured starlight itself, billowed behind her as she moved with inhuman grace through the sterile hallways. Each step left tiny sparkles of energy that faded slowly, marking her path like glowing footprints. The other passengers, delegates, servants, and various alien dignitaries, immediately pressed themselves against the walls when they saw her approaching. Some bowed deeply, others simply tried to become invisible. All of them feared her. She had just escaped another suffocating meeting where ancient lords discussed her future as if she were a prize to be won, rather than a being with her own thoughts and desires. Lord Vextaran of the Crimson Nebula had spent 2 hours explaining how their union would strengthen trade routes and stabilize mining operations in 17 star systems. Not once had anyone asked what she wanted. The corridor split into 3 directions ahead, each one identical to the last. The ship's designers had prioritized function over form, creating a maze of gray metal walls and harsh white lighting that made every section look exactly the same. Zarathis had been living on this floating prison for 3 weeks, but the identical passages still confused her. She took the middle path, walking faster now, her anger making her skin glow brighter. Behind her, she could hear the heavy footsteps of her royal guard trying to keep up. Captain Mordeth was probably having a panic attack right about now. The old warrior took his duty to protect her very seriously, but he also understood that sometimes the greatest danger to a princess was her own impulses. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from behind, along with urgent whispers in the formal language of the Dominion Court. They had noticed her absence from the meeting. Soon the entire ship would be searching for her, turning this diplomatic mission into an even bigger circus than it already was. Zarathis reached what she hoped was her assigned quarters and pressed her palm against the door panel. Nothing happened. She tried again, focusing her energy into the scanner, but the door remained stubbornly closed. The frustration that had been building for weeks finally overflowed. Without thinking, she gathered her power and phased through the metal barrier. It was an old technique learned in childhood that allowed her people to pass through solid matter by temporarily shifting their molecular frequency. The sensation was like diving through thick water, except the water was made of metal and circuits. She materialized inside what she expected to be her luxurious suite, and immediately knew she had made a mistake. The room was barely 1/4 the size of her actual quarters. Every surface was covered with strange objects that made no logical sense. Physical books, the kind made from actual paper, were stacked in crooked towers on the floor. A primitive stringed instrument leaned against one wall next to what appeared to be clothing hanging from metal hooks. Photographs, printed on actual paper like something from a museum, were stuck to the walls with some kind of adhesive strips. The air smelled completely wrong too. Instead of the carefully filtered atmosphere she was used to, this place carried dozens of unfamiliar scents. Something warm and bitter, mixed with leather, old paper, and traces of various foods she could not identify. It was overwhelming and strangely comforting at the same time. But most shocking of all was the human sitting calmly at a tiny desk in the corner. He appeared to be writing something by hand, using an actual pen on actual paper, completely ignoring her dramatic entrance. His dark hair was messy, as if he had been running his fingers through it while thinking. He wore simple clothes, nothing like the elaborate uniforms and robes she had seen on other species. Everything about him seemed deliberately plain and unremarkable. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Zarathus stood frozen near the door, her skin still glowing with residual energy from phasing through the wall. The human continued writing as if glowing alien princesses materialized in his room every day of the week. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were brown, she noticed, a warm color that reminded her of the wooden furniture in ancient Dominion temples. When he spoke, his voice was calm and completely without fear or reverence. "You gonna stand there glowing, or do you want some coffee?" Zarathus blinked several times, certain she had misunderstood. In her entire life, spanning 847 standard years, no one had ever spoken to her with such casual indifference. Kings bowed when she entered their throne rooms. Generals saluted. Even her own father, the Emperor of 1,000 worlds, addressed her with formal titles and careful respect. What?" she managed to say. The human set down his pen and turned in his chair to face her properly. His expression was curious but not awed, interested but not intimidated. He studied her the same way she might examine an unusual piece of art or an interesting mathematical equation. "Coffee," he repeated, gesturing toward a small device on a shelf that was apparently some kind of food preparation unit. "It's a drink, helps with thinking, though I'm guessing you probably don't need help with that, considering you just walked through my door like it was made of air." "I am Princess Zarathus of the Ethereal Dominion," she announced, falling back on formal protocol because nothing else made sense anymore. "Heir to 17 star systems and commander of the 4th Energy Fleet." "Cool," the human said, and went back to writing. Zarathus stared at him. The word meant nothing to her, but his tone suggested mild approval, mixed with complete disinterest in her royal status. She had traveled to dozens of worlds, met hundreds of different species, and every single one of them had reacted to her titles with fear, respect, greed, or calculation. No one had ever responded with cool and gone back to their homework. Thuine. Sound of footsteps in the corridor outside broke through her confusion. Heavy boots moving fast, accompanied by the distinctive energy hum of Dominion weapons being powered up. Her guard had found her trail. "Your ethereal magnificence." Captain Mordeth's voice carried through the walls. "Please respond if you can hear this." The human looked up from his writing again, one eyebrow raised in what might have been amusement. "Ethereal magnificence, seriously, that's what they call you?" "It is my proper title," Zarathus said, though for some reason the words sounded ridiculous when spoken in this cluttered little room full of books and strange smells. "Seems like a lot of work," the human observed. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Chen. People usually just call me Marcus or Chen if they're being formal. Sometimes hey you if they're really busy." The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Captain Mordeth was probably scanning for her energy signature right now, trying to figure out why it appeared to be coming from inside someone else's quarters. In a few seconds, he would override the door controls and enter with a full security team. Zarathus made a decision that surprised even her. "I claim sanctuary," she announced loudly enough for her guard to hear through the door. "Under Section 12 of the Diplomatic Immunity Protocols, I am requesting temporary asylum in these quarters." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear Marcus's pen scratching against the paper as he continued writing. Came Captain Mordeth's voice, much quieter now. "Your Magnificence, could you please clarify your legal status?" "I am claiming sanctuary with—" She looked at the human, who had glanced up from his work with an expression of mild curiosity. "What was your name again?" "Marcus Chen. Human pilot 3rd class. Currently assigned to navigation duty for the diplomatic mission." He paused, then added helpfully, "Also apparently your new roommate, I guess." Outside the door, she could hear urgent whispered conversations in several different languages as her guard tried to figure out what to do next. The sanctuary laws were ancient and rarely used, but they were still legally binding. Once claimed, they could not be revoked without formal hearings and diplomatic negotiations. Marcus went back to his writing. After a moment, he asked, "So about that coffee. You want some or not? Because this is going to be a long conversation, and I function better when I'm caffeinated." Zarathis looked around the chaotic little room, at the books and photographs, and strange human artifacts, at Marcus calmly writing in his journal as if harboring runaway alien royalty was just another part of his daily routine. For the first time in centuries, she was somewhere her status meant nothing, where no one wanted anything from her except maybe an answer to a simple question about beverages. "Yes," she said, settling carefully onto the edge of what appeared to be a sleeping platform. "I think I would like some coffee."